Join us today on Breitbart News Daily.
Hey, Steve. Thank you very much. It's great to be on with you.
Wanted to have you on for a long time. My daughter is a graduate of West Point and served with the 101st as an Army officer in Iraq many, many years ago with the 326 Combat Engineers. And so she's always been bugging me about, Dad, have you had Senator Cotton on? He's from the 101st.
Thanks very much for her service. She did it the right way. Went to our service academy, one of the great institutions of higher education. You know, I went to Harvard, so I had to redeem myself by joining the Army afterwards.
But Senator Cotton, it's so great. I mean, we need more guys from the Ivy Leagues, obviously, to do it. And the way you did it is so spectacular. You get so many fans. Listen, the reason we want to have you on the show is, one, we're trying to empower the audience, and a lot of them are very, very happy and very worked up. They saw the article we had up on Breitbart about you saying this was a jailbreak bill. I don't even know what we call it anymore. We've had Andy McCarthy. We had a whole 2 weeks of some of the top people in the country, Jeff Sessions, Andy McCarthy, all the men and women who are running these DA associations on here, and literally people were pulling their hair out. And here's what they couldn't understand: how many people they admire, like the Mike Lees of the world and the Kochs and other groups, it seemed to be pushing this, whereas they had Jeff Sessions and Tom Cotton and guys that always have been on their side of the football saying, I don't know how this came about, but this is the worst thing in the world. And then you threw down yesterday at the Hudson Institute. So can you explain to people exactly what it is, what we avoided, and is it dead?
Yeah, Steve, so I think many of the proponents of sentencing reductions, hearts are in the right place. They see poverty, they see broken families and at-risk communities, but they're just looking for the wrong solutions. And in my view, the kind of policing techniques that we've developed over the last 25 years, mandatory minimum sentencing laws, 3 strikes and you're out laws, and other reforms have been responsible for the incredible decline in crime over the last 25 years. Unfortunately, we may now be living through the early stages of a new crime wave. Murders and rapes and other violent crimes are up all across America. The American people say they're more concerned about crime than they have been at any time in the last 15 years. This is not the time to start releasing violent felons from prison. And the facts of the matter are, in the federal prison system, we've already released over 30,000 felons through prior revisions of the sentencing guidelines. We're probably going to release close to another 40,000. Some of those have already gone on to commit heinous crimes. It's almost 3/4 of all felons.
Are you saying 70,000 felons in total at the end of this program will be put back into society?
And that's without any new legislation. That's actions by the Sentencing Commission to reduce past sentencing guidelines. And again, some of them have already committed crimes. That's just going to be inevitable given recidivism rates in our society. And ultimately, we're now down to less than 200,000 prisoners in the federal system. Less than 0.5% of those, just a small fraction, just a few hundred, are in prison for anything like mere drug possession. And believe me, most of those people pleaded down for more serious crimes. But even if you grant that, how can legislation claim to be focused on low-level nonviolent offenders if it's letting out thousands of felons when there's only a few hundred people in federal prison for mere drug possession? I just think that we shouldn't use this kind of blunt instrument to address what may be a handful of cases here and there of an unjust sentence that should be commuted or for which the offender should be pardoned.
Now, you had a throwdown yesterday that said, is this what the audience, I'm going to bring Alex, my co-host, in a second. I know he wants to ask you a question, but is this thing over? Because, we put up your talk at Hudson yesterday, and of course, our audience has been telling us, what do we need to do? How do we have Sessions back? How do we have Cotton's back? What do we need to do? And then yesterday, it seemed to imply you're saying this thing's dead. It may not be dead for forever, but it's dead for this term. Is that what people should take away?
Well, bad ideas in Washington have a way of being resurrected. If you look at bad criminal justice policy or bad open borders legislation in the immigration area. So your listeners should not relent. Your listeners should continue to call and email their congressmen and their senators and ask them not to support any kind of legislation that would let violent felons out of prison. Now, of course, there are things that we can do to change some aspects of our criminal justice system. We should have more rehabilitation, more education, more training opportunities available for prisoners so they can become productive citizens when they get back to society. We should try to reform our prisons to make them safer for both the prisoners and for the correction officers. But we should not be letting violent felons out of prison, and your listeners need to tell their elected representatives that.
Senator Cotton, this is Alex Marlow, Editor-in-Chief, Breitbart News. And I wanted to ask you, is it possible to have a system where we are releasing violent criminals, we're releasing felons, and not have an increase in crime? It's just if you're releasing murderers and rapists or any people like that, maybe that's not the level we're talking about. But how do we know that there will be a steady rate in crime?
I think it's nearly impossible, and that's what we've learned over the last 25 years. The New York Times notoriously continues to print headlines that say things like, crime rate falls even as prison population increases, without seeing the connection between those two things. Now, there are ways you can use a precise scalpel of things like the commutation power for either the president or governors in states or parole boards who can take into account individualized cases of people who have clearly turned themselves around, who have the skills and want to get out and get a job and be a good dad, or who have been saved by Christ. There are ways to address these cases on individualized basis without just letting out thousands of felons who are inevitably going to commit heinous new crimes, as some already have from the prior releases from federal prison.
So what do you believe is the political motivation for people who want to release these criminals?
Well, again, on the Republican side at least, the ones with whom I talk are almost always motivated by the best of intentions. They see some unjust cases. Now, we may disagree if it's unjust or not, but they see what they think is an unjust sentence. They see children being raised without a mom or a dad. They see grinding poverty in some of our large cities. They see broken communities, and they think that that our criminal justice system has contributed to that. I understand. I see those problems. I agree that there are problems in our society. What I don't agree with is that letting violent felons out of prison is a way to fix it. I think keeping violent felons and sending more violent felons to prison is a way to protect towns. Towns like Blytheville in Arkansas, which I represent, that had a major raid just last year by the FBI and other agencies. That town wasn't outraged by the aggressive tactics. They were thankful that someone finally came and arrested 70 people who were preying on their community.
Senator Cotton, we found it so refreshing what you had to say at the Hudson Institute yesterday to kind of go against counter what the narrative has been. How do people get more access to your thinking, to your writing? Is there a website? How can they get more access? We're clearly covering this quite intensely at Breitbart, but just generally, how can people get? Because I know we have a very activist audience here on the site and on the show.
So the simplest place is just my website is cotton.senate.gov. It also has links to my Facebook page where we expand some more, as well as Twitter. But the speech I gave yesterday at the Hudson Institute kind of sums up a lot of my thinking on specific policies, but also the mindset behind these policies. The mindset being that criminals are victims, and as the Obama administration now calls them, we're not supposed to call them criminals, we're supposed to call them justice-involved individuals. And I'm not joking about that, as if somehow the justice system just happened to them. They didn't commit crimes. But criminals are criminals. Victims are victims. And that's ultimately, it's the mindset that we have to overcome and recognize that safe streets and communities are not the natural state of man. We have the kind of historically low levels of crime today because of 25 years of hard-won experience from cops on the beat and prosecutors and elected leaders. And I kind of laid out that entire history in my speech yesterday, so I would encourage folks to go to my website, cotton.senate.gov, to take a look at it.
No, it was a tremendous speech, and in fact, our coverage of it went viral. So it's people are really quite interested in this. Senator Cotton, thank you so much for joining us. Senator Tom Cotton, Arkansas, American patriot and American hero. Thank you so much for taking time away from your busy schedule.